when emotion takes the schedule hostage. Strong feelings feel like fuel. They rush the chest, tighten the jaw, heat the face. You stand taller for a moment. People notice. They nod. They say you look serious this time. The body believes it too. Until the morning comes cold and quiet, and the feeling is gone. Most people mistake that first surge for discipline. They confuse intensity with structure. That confusion is where consistency dies. Not loudly. It dies politely, after a few skipped mornings, after one exception that feels justified. You've seen the pattern. The alarm sounds. The hand reaches out. Fingers hesitate above the phone. The room is dim. Breath is shallow. The body asks a simple question without words: do we feel like it today? That question alone decides the outcome. Training waits on emotion. Work waits on mood. The schedule bends. Others learn you are flexible. They plan around that. Strong feelings demand expression. They want release, not repetition. They burn fast, then leave ash. A warrior learned early that fire is useful only when contained. Without a vessel, it consumes its own source. In old dojos, the floor was cold every morning. Knees met it the same way. No music. No surge. Just breath fogging the air and bodies moving before opinions formed. Outsiders called it rigid. They laughed. The practitioners did not respond. They were already tying their belts. If you've been relying on feeling ready, you already know how this ends. Comment the habit you started with emotion and lost in silence. One line. No explanation. Negotiation begins where feeling is allowed. He wakes before the alarm. Eyes open. The ceiling is dark. A truck passes outside. The body is warm under the blanket. The legs feel heavy. There is no surge. No excitement. Just wait. This is where most routines quietly fracture. The mind begins its work. Not loud. Reasonable. Just today. You trained hard yesterday. The body deserves rest. The chest tightens as if agreement has already been reached. The hand stays still. Somewhere, a schedule loosens its grip. This is not laziness. It is negotiation wearing a calm face. Strong feelings invite debate. When motivation is present, action feels obvious. When it fades, choice appears. Choice is where consistency bleeds out. A warrior does not lose his path in battle. He loses it in the moments where he believes discussion is still possible. In a small training hall, the lights flick on at the same hour each morning. One man arrives early. Another arrives late. The late one smiles, jokes about traffic. The early one is already sweating, breath steady, shoulders loose. No words are exchanged. The room learns who can be counted on. Respect forms without ceremony. Emotion always asks for compensation. When you feel driven, you overextend. When you feel flat, you withdraw. The body learns this rhythm. High effort followed by absence. Intensity followed by guilt. Others notice the pattern before you do. They stop expecting you at the same time every day. Invitations shift. Trust thins. A monk kneels even when the knees ache. The floor is cold. Fingers stiffen as they rest on the thighs. Breath scrapes the throat. There is no inner speech about whether this is optimal. The bell does not care how he feels. The body lowers itself because it has done so 1,000 times before. Identity moves first. Feeling arrives late. Modern routines collapse because they ask a daily question. How do I feel? The body answers honestly. The answer changes. Consistency cannot survive that volatility. It requires silence where emotion expects a vote. Watch how negotiation shows itself. Shoes left by the door instead of laid out. Training clothes folded loosely. An alarm set later than usual. Small concessions that feel harmless. The body senses weakness in the structure. It leans into comfort. Others see you hesitate and mirror it. Standards soften across the room. A runner steps onto wet pavement without comment. Rain beads on the calves. Breath fogs the air. The pace is slower today. That is allowed. What is not allowed is absence. Continuity holds even when performance drops. The street learns his footsteps. Neighbors expect the sound. Strong feelings want to be honored. Discipline does not argue with them. It ignores them. Not out of strength, but out of design. When action is pre-decided, emotion becomes background noise. It can rise and fall without consequence. You can feel deeply and still be unreliable. You can feel nothing and remain exact. One earns applause. The other earns trust. Most people choose the former without realizing the cost. This is the quiet line where identity begins to harden or dissolve. The body obeys patterns, not passion. The door opens at the same hour. Cold air hits the lungs. Shoes meet the floor without adjustment. Laces pull tight with stiff fingers. There is no internal speech about readiness. The body recognizes a pattern and steps into it. This is how consistency actually forms. Strong feelings teach the body to wait. Wait for the rush. Wait for clarity. Wait until it feels right. Over time, the muscles learn hesitation. The breath shortens before effort. The hands slow. Action becomes conditional. Others sense it. They fill the silence with suggestions. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe later. The environment conspires with your mood. A worker sits at the desk before sunrise. The chair is hard. The room smells faintly of dust and stale coffee. The screen glows. Fingers begin moving even while the mind lags behind. There is no ceremony. Emails are answered. Lines are written. When coworkers arrive, they comment on his reliability. They don't call it discipline. They call it "that's just how he is." Emotion wants novelty. It wants a different soundtrack, a different setting, a better reason. Patterns deny that request. They repeat without apology. The same stretch. The same route. The same hour. The body stops asking why. It starts preparing automatically. This is when friction appears. Friends notice your absence from spontaneous plans. They joke about your schedule. Their tone is light, but their eyes measure your flexibility. You decline without explanation. The jaw tightens briefly. Breath stays even. The room adjusts. You feel the shift. Consistency always costs social comfort first. In a dojo, practice begins even when the instructor is late. Students line up anyway. Knees hit the mat. The floor is unforgiving. A dull ache settles in the legs. No one looks around for permission. When the instructor arrives, he nods once. The hierarchy remains intact. The ritual held without supervision. Strong feelings collapse under repetition. They cannot survive sameness. That is why they are unreliable guides. The body, however, adapts quickly to expectation. When an action happens at a fixed time, the nervous system prepares ahead of thought. Hunger appears at the same hour. Fatigue arrives predictably. The body aligns itself to the structure you enforce. Notice what breaks this alignment. A skipped day justified by emotion. A delayed start explained by mood. The pattern weakens. The next morning, resistance grows louder. The body senses uncertainty and protects itself with inertia. You call it low motivation. It is simply a system responding to inconsistency. A craftsman sharpens his tools before the shop opens. The stone grinds metal. Sparks flicker. Hands move with practiced pressure. Customers trust his work because his presence is predictable. They don't ask how inspired he feels. They care that the blade cuts clean every time. When passion leads, rhythm fractures. When rhythm leads, passion becomes irrelevant. This reversal unsettles people. They prefer stories of fire and intensity. They understand them. Quiet repetition feels alien, even threatening. Consistency is not maintained by force. It is maintained by expectation. The body expects action at a certain time and becomes restless when it doesn't occur. This restlessness is misread as discipline. It is simply alignment. Most never reach this point. They keep feeding emotion, wondering why it stars them later. The question is whether you are willing to build a pattern that no longer asks how you feel, when continuity matters more than how it looks. He trains with an injury. Not hard. Not impressively. The movement is smaller today. The pace slower. A dull ache sits behind the knee. Breath is shallow. Sweat still forms. The session ends early. It still happens. This is where most people quit without realizing it. They confuse consistency with performance. If it can't be done well, they decide it shouldn't be done at all. Strong feelings support that decision. Pride disguises itself as standards. The routine disappears quietly. In a temple courtyard, an old man sweeps leaves after a storm. The ground is wet. The broom drags. His back bends with effort. He does not aim for cleanliness. He aims for presence. The sweeping happens every morning regardless of result. The courtyard looks different each day. The act remains unchanged. Emotion pushes toward extremes. All in or nothing. Perfect or abandoned. This rhythm feels decisive. It feels honest. It is also unstable. Continuity survives by allowing imperfection without discussion. The body learns that showing up does not require excellence. A writer sits at the desk with a fever. Eyes burn. The room tilts slightly. One sentence is written. It is not good. The file is saved. The laptop closes. The chain remains intact. Tomorrow will be easier because today was not skipped. People around you misunderstand this. They see reduced output and assume decline. They comment lightly. Taking it easy today? You nod once. You do not explain. Explanation invites negotiation. You feel the social pull toward comfort. You resist it by doing less, not by stopping. Strong feelings hate this middle ground. They want triumph or rest. Continuity lives between those poles. It is quiet, unremarkable. It does not produce stories worth telling. It produces trust over time. A martial artist practices footwork slowly when exhausted. Each step lands deliberately. Calves tighten. Balance wavers. The mirror reflects mediocrity. He continues anyway. When energy returns days later, the body remembers the pattern. There is no restart. Only continuation. Notice how often routines break because of self-respect. You don't want to do it poorly, so you don't do it at all. That logic sounds clean. It feels disciplined. It is emotional avoidance. The body hears only absence. Continuity teaches the nervous system a different lesson. Action happens regardless of condition. Condition adjusts afterward. Over time, the baseline rises without drama. Outsiders see the result and assume intensity. They did not see the quiet days that held the line. In a workshop, the lights turn on even when no orders are pending. The tools are laid out. The bench is wiped down. The owner stands there for a moment, hands resting on the surface. The shop opens because it always opens. Customers arrive later. Or they don't. The practice remains. Strong feelings demand meaning. Continuity does not provide it. It provides stability. This frustrates people who want their effort to feel significant every day. Discipline does not offer that reward. It offers reliability instead. There will be days when your work looks weak. When your training feels empty. When your presence seems unnecessary. Those are the days that decide whether the chain holds. Most people break it to protect their image of themselves. The question is whether you are willing to be consistent when there is nothing impressive to show. Pre-decided responses remove emotional authority. The rain starts before dawn. You hear it on the roof. A steady tapping. The air feels heavier. The body registers the change before the mind forms a thought. This is where routines usually stall. Weather becomes an argument. Mood joins it. But the shoes are already by the door. Training moves indoors. Not as a decision. As a response. The body does not feel clever for adapting. It simply continues. Emotion arrives late and finds no leverage. Strong feelings demand relevance. They want to be consulted. When plans are flexible, they take control. When responses are pre-decided, they lose authority. This is the difference between reacting and executing. A man finishes work late. Shoulders tight. Eyes dry. The thought appears, today doesn't count. He notices it without engagement. He opens the notebook anyway. Writes one line. The wrist aches slightly. The line is crude. The book closes. Sleep comes easier. The chain holds. People assume consistency requires constant decision-making. In reality, decisions exhaust consistency. Each choice drains structure. Pre-decided responses remove that drain. When X happens, Y follows. No evaluation. No justification. The body prefers this simplicity. In a small gym, the power goes out. Lights die. The room darkens. One person leaves. Another waits. The second begins stretching near the window. Cold air brushes the skin. Muscles lengthen slowly. When the lights return, he is already moving. Others look surprised. They didn't know what to do without guidance. Emotion thrives in uncertainty. It fills the gap with preference and avoidance. Systems collapse there. A warrior does not rise to the level of his feelings. He falls to the level of his preparation. Watch how people speak when plans break. They explain. They apologize. They renegotiate. Each word reopens the question of commitment. You feel this pressure too. The desire to be understood. To be seen as reasonable. Consistency often dies in that need. A monk is interrupted mid-practice. A visitor speaks. He listens. Nods once. When the visitor leaves, he returns to the mat without comment. Knees touch the floor. Breath steadies. The interruption did not require reinterpretation. The practice resumes because it was never up for debate. Strong feelings feel personal. Pre-decided responses feel mechanical. That is why people resist them. They want to feel involved in their own discipline. They want authorship. What they get instead is fragility. A runner twists an ankle slightly. The pain is sharp, then dull. He walks home. The next morning, he cycles lightly. Heart rate rises. Sweat forms. The legs move within limits. The rule was never run at all costs. The rule was trained daily. The method adjusts. The identity remains intact. Others comment on your inflexibility. They laugh about your rules. You feel the friction. A tightening in the chest. A brief urge to explain yourself. You don't. Explanation invites revision. Silence preserves structure. Over time, these pre-decided responses stack. The body stops panicking when conditions change. It already knows what comes next. Emotion loses its veto power. It can protest without consequence. Most people live inside constant negotiation. They believe this is freedom. It is not. It is exposure. The question is whether you are willing to remove your feelings from the chain of command. Consistency changes how others treat you. At first, no one notices. You arrive when you said you would. You leave when it's time. The body moves through the routine without display. Breath steady. Jaw relaxed. Nothing to comment on. Consistency is quiet in the beginning. Then patterns accumulate. You decline invitations without apology. You train while others debate. You work while moods shift around you. People begin to adjust their expectations. They stop checking whether you're coming. They assume you are. Or they stop asking entirely. This is where discomfort appears. Not in you, but around you. Friends joke that you are rigid. Colleagues roll their eyes when you won't bend a schedule. The laughter is light, but the pressure is real. Your chest tightens for a moment. The urge to soften rises. This is social friction doing its job. Strong feelings crave approval. They want alignment. Consistency does not negotiate belonging. It accepts distance as a cost. The body learns this before the mind does. A slight tension in the shoulders when you say no. A slow exhale afterward. The nervous system recalibrates. In a training hall, one student never misses. Others come and go. Weeks pass. Months. When questions arise, eyes turn toward the constant one. Not because he is the best, but because he is there. Authority forms from presence, not performance. Emotion seeks resonance. It wants others to feel what you feel. Consistency creates asymmetry. You move on a rhythm others don't share. This unsettles them. They test you with comments, with requests, with small disruptions. Each test asks the same thing: will you bend to maintain comfort? A man leaves a gathering early. The room is warm. Laughter continues behind him. Outside, the air is cold. He walks alone. Hands in pockets. Breath visible. There is a brief sting of isolation. It passes. The morning will arrive on schedule. People misinterpret this shift. They think discipline makes you distant. In truth, it makes you predictable. Predictability removes leverage. Others cannot pull you into their urgency. They must meet you where you stand or not at all. In a workshop, a worker clocks out at the same time daily. No excuses. No explanations. When emergencies happen, he responds calmly. When trivial requests arise, he declines. His boundaries are not emotional. They are structural. Management learns the difference. Strong feelings want to be shared. Consistency doesn't require witnesses. This difference changes your social position. You become less entertaining. More reliable. Some drift away. Others draw closer, seeking stability they don't have. A martial artist bows and leaves while others linger. Sweat cools on the skin. Muscles relax. The ritual ends cleanly. There is no lingering high. Tomorrow will look the same. That sameness is the point. This is the hidden cost of consistency. It removes your availability as a variable. People cannot count on your mood. Only on your presence or absence. That clarity feels harsh in a world built on negotiation. Most people abandon routines here. Not from difficulty, but from loneliness. They return to flexibility and regain social ease. The question is whether you are willing to let your consistency redraw your place among others, when the body moves before emotion speaks. At some point, the alarm rings and there is no pause. The hand reaches out. The feet touch the floor. Cold travels up the legs. The body is already standing before the mind forms an opinion. This moment is quiet. Easy to miss. It is also irreversible. Strong feelings no longer lead. They follow. They arrive late, like a comment after the decision has been made. You notice them the way you notice weather through a window. Present. Irrelevant. The routine has crossed a threshold. Action is no longer initiated by desire or resisted by discomfort. It is triggered by time, by place, by sequence. The body recognizes the order and completes it. Emotion adjusts afterward, not before. A man ties his belt with stiff fingers. The same knot. The same pull. The fabric presses against the waist. Breath settles. He did not feel eager. He does not feel proud. He simply begins. Others in the room sense the absence of hesitation. It changes the tone without a word. This is where people mislabel discipline as willpower. They see output without visible struggle and assume strength. They don't see the years of repetition that remove the question entirely. They don't see how boring it became before it became automatic. Strong feelings still appear. Fatigue still visits. Irritation surfaces. But none of it stops the sequence. The body has learned that feeling is not a signal. It is just noise. This learning is physical, not intellectual. A craftsman opens the shop on a day with no appointments. The lock clicks. The door swings inward. Dust floats in the light. He wipes the counter. Sharpens a blade. The motions are calm. Customers may not come. The body does not wait for justification. People around you notice a shift. You respond faster. Not with urgency, but with inevitability. Requests are answered clearly. Yes or no. No deliberation. This clarity unsettles those who live inside constant emotional processing. They ask fewer questions. They test you less. In training, fatigue appears mid-session. Muscles burn. The breath shortens. The body adjusts pace without stopping. Intensity drops. Continuity holds. The mind watches this happen with mild surprise. It is no longer in charge. This stage feels empty to those chasing meaning. There is no rush. No story. Just execution. Many abandon the path here, searching for feeling again. They mistake calm for loss of passion. They forget the original goal was reliability, not excitement. A monk rises from meditation when the bell sounds. Legs numb. Pins and needles flare. He stands anyway. Blood returns slowly. There is no commentary about progress. The body moves because the sound occurred. That is all. Strong feelings once destroyed your consistency because they were allowed to decide. Now they observe. They may protest. They may praise. Neither matters. This is the quiet transformation no one celebrates. When discipline stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like gravity. Most people never experience this. They quit earlier, mistaking struggle for authenticity. The question is whether you recognize this silence as progress, or abandon it because it feels unfamiliar. The cost of returning to feeling. There is a moment when the routine is established and you are tempted to test it. To see if you still feel something. You skip a day without reason. The body notices immediately. Sleep feels heavier. The morning stretches longer than it should. A low irritation settles behind the eyes. Strong feelings rush back to fill the gap. Relief first. Then justification. You tell yourself you earned this flexibility. Others reinforce it. Good to rest. Balance matters. The words land easily. The structure loosens. The next day, resistance appears earlier. The floor feels colder than before. Muscles tighten faster. The body remembers the absence more clearly than the effort. What was automatic now requires discussion. Emotion has regained its seat at the table. A man who never missed begins to explain himself. Just this week. Just this phase. His voice sounds reasonable. His shoulders tense as he speaks. Those around him nod, grateful he is becoming like them again. The social field relaxes. This is how consistency dissolves without drama. Not through collapse, but through reintroduction of feeling as authority. The body had learned a simple order. Now it must renegotiate. That negotiation drains energy before action even begins. In a dojo, a student who once arrived early starts drifting in on time. Then slightly late. The room feels different. No one comments. They don't need to. The absence of certainty changes the air. Leadership does not announce its departure. It just stops being relied upon. Strong feelings promise vitality. They deliver volatility. When you return to them, the body loses its anchor. Hunger shifts. Sleep fragments. Focus scatters. You call it needing a break. The body calls it instability. A craftsman closes the shop for a day without notice. The next morning, opening feels heavier. The lock resists. The hands hesitate. Customers ask questions. Explanations pile up. What was once silent now demands speech. This is the real cost of letting feeling lead again. Not the missed day. The loss of inevitability. Action becomes optional. Optional becomes occasional. Occasional becomes rare. Most people cycle here forever. Periods of strictness followed by emotional release. They mistake the contrast for balance. They never stay long enough on one side to let the body settle. Consistency is fragile only when it depends on how you feel. When feeling is removed, it becomes boring. Stable. Hard to explain. Easy to lose if you grow sentimental about intensity. The body does not ask for passion. It asks for order. The question is whether you will protect that order when emotion offers you a story to break it. Discipline remains when feeling leaves. In the end, nothing dramatic happens. There is no final surge. No closing ceremony. The body simply continues. Morning arrives. Feet touch the floor. Breath steadies. The sequence holds without asking for meaning. This is where discipline reveals its true nature. It is not something you summon. It is something that remains when emotion withdraws. When praise fades. When novelty dies. What is left is order. Strong feelings once felt like proof. Proof that you cared. Proof that you were serious. Now they pass through without authority. Some days they are loud. Other days absent. Neither changes the schedule. The body does not interpret them anymore. People around you still live inside fluctuation. They chase energy. They recover from burnout. They announce restarts. You move quietly among them. Predictable. Unimpressed. This distance is not arrogance. It is structural. A warrior was never defined by how fiercely he felt before battle. He was defined by whether he showed up when it was time. Again. And again. And again. The same hour. The same posture. The same restraint. Discipline is not something you do every day. It is something you become when negotiation ends. If this exposed where emotion has been running your routines, leave a single line below. Name the action you will perform tomorrow at a fixed time. No explanation. No context. Just the act.